Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each Top 10 by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
We're back.
Ruben Bressler.
We certainly are. Good to be back. How's everybody doing?
Well, I'm back from Gen Con, and because I was at Gen Con and Gen Con was Gen Conning, I kind of didn't get to post the other top 10 until just like a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was on me. And it's funny, though, because if you actually listen to that top 10, we begin with, and Ruben's back from the dead and everything's great. And yet, here we are with, Ruben, are you back? Are you good? Are you okay?
Oh, yeah. I'm good now. There was a hiccup there. Literally and figuratively. I don't want to get too much into it, but yes.
But we're back.
I am healthy.
We're ready to rock and roll with a top 10 topic that was suggested. I'm pretty sure this one was over Twitter. Thank you to whoever suggested it, because control finishers is really, really interesting. However, we
deep
also
topic.
Oh yeah, well, I think we're going to get, and again, it also has some overlap, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we also began with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most luxuriant and let us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 equipment. Ruben?
Well, this week's winner is our first ever winner from Facebook. Be sure to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe and do everything social that says we exist, including liking us on Facebook. And because of that, we have a winner from Facebook this week, David Korzik. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who writes, "So I figured out my favorite equipment. It's the third piece in the cycle of 3, and it's the Tammiest of all equipment. Helm of Cauldra from 5th Dawn. Pair it with the sword from Mirrodin and the shield from Darksteel, and you get a 4/4 legendary Cauldra avatar, which gains first strike, trample, haste, indestructible, and +5/+5, and whenever it deals damage to another creature, exile that creature. The pieces of equipment are literally the set symbols for the original Mirrodin block, and the artwork was done by the also legendary Donato Giancola. It's got to be the best around."
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's, I mean, these days that costs like 2 white and a colorless or whatever for 4 legendary with all the things. We're spoiled, guys. I'm sorry.
I mean, it certainly was. I mean, all of the set symbols for an entire block. It's that iconic in the first. That was really the breakout block and the first time that equipment appeared. So yeah, definitely love that one.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted to make it, kind of neat and cool, and it only takes 1 mana to activate when you have the Helm of Cauldra out, which is pretty neat, and kind of sort of attaches and becomes
and
sort
having
of
a super cycle across multiple blocks is not a thing that you get all the time, and so I think that's a great entry.
Yeah, and this is one of the parts of the artifact block that was totally safe and totally neat,
right,
and kind of
there
cool,
you go.
And not busted like the rest of it,
right.
But that's okay. So thank you very much, David, from Facebook. CoolStuffInc.com will provide you a $50 gift certificate. Contact us on one of our social media channels, in which point in time, at some point, I or Aaron will help you and get you that code that you need. $50 worth of free stuff, which is awesome. That said,
free cool stuff.
Free, cool, super cool stuff.
There you go.
Well, how do you define a control finisher? Ruben, how do you get started? How do we go down this path of control finishers? What is a control finisher?
Yeah, I had an interesting time going. Like, some cards, you think to yourself, all right, this was a control deck. This deck was blue-white control or 5-color control. And so it's real easy to identify that it was a control deck. And then it had like 2 cards in it that ended up being the things that killed you. Those are obvious control finishers. Typically, they're big honking creatures or giant endgaming planeswalkers or things like that. But there were also lots of different other types of definitions of what is a control deck, what defines a control deck, and what defines a finisher in those control decks. And so I had a really interesting, fun time sort of playing with the definition of what a finisher means. To me, a finisher is the end game card, whether it ends the game by itself or not. It's the card that when it happens, that's signaling that this is the game. This is how we're finishing this game. And that's how I sort of signified that. I think all of the cards that I ended up being win conditions. But there were certainly some cards that were on my short list that might not have ended the game necessarily by themselves, but were definitely the finishers.
So what was your number 10?
My number 10 comes from a very classic old school control deck that's been around, been written about forever, called Draw-Go. It is the only creature in the Draw-Go deck. There are just 30 counterspells in this deck. This was the Whispers of the Muse deck that Randy Buehler used to such great effect. I considered having Stalking Stones in this slot, as that was one of the finishers of that deck, which was a colorless land that became a 3/3. But really, to me, the signpost of this deck, the real finisher, was the one copy of Rainbow Efreet. So Rainbow Efreet is a rare from Visions. It is a 3/1 summon Efreet creature for 3 colorless and a blue. It has flying, and for the low cost of blue, it can phase out. So it can just sort of blink and stick around and not really die to removal, and you can leave tons of mana up once you play your 15th land drop, finally play your Rainbow Efreet onto the battlefield, and get through and be the finisher for that classic deck that Randy Buehler brought to such prominence.
Yeah, while it's phased out, as they say, it's treated as though it doesn't exist. It phases in before you untap your next untap step, which is weird and dumb and complicated, and it sucks.
Phasing is a very strange ability. Aaron likes phasing, don't you?
I love phasing.
Why? Why? It's like
it speaks to her on an elemental level more than the ability is good.
It's just a few steps away from banding. It's weird and it's strange. Nothing interacts the way you think it does. You don't get any of the end of the battlefield triggers. It's just really odd. It's a weird ability. But a Rainbow Efreet in and of itself, again, back in the day, we struggled. We had to reach for things to actually kill people. And sometimes it was a 4-mana 3/1 with flying.
I mean, I'll tell you what, if this were around today, it would probably still be a pretty good control finisher, assuming they would ever print phasing, because that's a tough thing to deal with. You can respond to any removal spell. It's just pretty difficult to deal with. So once you put it down, like, what are they going to do about it? It's just inevitability in its purest form.
Oh, man. So, Aaron, what is your number 10?
Up until recently, I hadn't played Standard for a really long time. I think the last time I played Standard, I was practicing for the 2016 Star City Games Invitational in Atlanta, Georgia, in December of 2016. I was playing Black Green Delirium. Eitherworks Marvel was still legal. Smuggler's Copter was still legal. All these things were still happening. So that shows you how long it had been since I played Standard. And then the bans happened. Standard became kind of fun again. And one of the signals that, Standard, one of the ways they tried to get people back to Standard was by releasing these challenger decks, where you could play essentially a tier 1 deck or buy a tier 1 deck for like $20 to $30. Maybe I think the Mardu one was closer to $40 because Hazoret was in there. But and so these decks came out as a way to encourage people to play Standard again. And so I was going over all the possibilities. And I found the one that was the least interactive, which really spoke to me. And so I picked it up and right out of the box, took it to F&M and had an amazing time casting my number 10, which is Approach of the Second Sun. So Approach of the Second Sun is 6 colorless and a white as a sorcery. It says if Approach of the Second Sun was cast from your hand and you cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. I can't tell you how good it feels to cast this. I've had so many people scoop after the first one. They're like, I'm not sitting around for this. You can have it. I've had people get upset about it. They're like, ugh. And the fun thing about this is that the first one does not even need to resolve. The first one's just a cast. That one can get countered. The second one's the one that has to get through. And so you'll get people that are like, negates, and they're so proud of themselves. And then the second one comes and you're like, yeah, I didn't need that.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah.
And then, you have enough draw spells where it's very easy to get to those 7 cards. You have enough ways to stall out the game. And then the other cool thing about this deck is because you don't typically run creatures, so people are bringing in all their Duress effects, and then you board in something like Regal Caracal, and then beat them down with a couple 3/3s. And so this deck really made me love Standard again. Now that Teferi is out, people really aren't relying on Approach too much, but for the couple of months it was viable and relevant. I had so much fun playing this, and it's kind of ironic that a Ginger would enjoy a Sunrise, but
there you go.
Wow. Giant Daystar. The Approach of the Second Sun in and of itself is like a cool alternate win condition. It's fun to me
Absolutely.
To see like Hearthstone is starting to get some of these alternate win conditions already, and they're like, ooh, we can win different ways, and we're like, we've been doing that for like decades. We do all sorts of crazy ways to win. That's right. We do this.
Yeah, that's just a fascinating, like, flavorful, interesting. I mean, obviously, the number 7 being the 7 days of the week, with the being a complete cycle of the Second Sun.
Everything in 7 days. Yeah.
Yep, just everything about the Approach of the Second Sun card and the flavor, the art, everything came together, making it even a competitive deck. I thought everything about that card was just really, really well done.
Absolutely. So for my list, in terms of, again, the control fishers, I think we have more or less an idea of this is how we're going to win the game. And I have a few variations of that as we move forward. However, this one's pretty straightforward. And a very recent card, one of my favorite recent cards. And in that, I like how Wizards sometimes kind of just sort of sits down and says, look, this is how you're going to win the game. That's how we're going to do it. It's okay. This is the tool that you have. We've put everything in here. All the tools are here in the toolbox. You're going to take this and you're going to kill your opponent with it. And you go, okay, all right, that sounds like fun. And they go, all right, here you go. Here is Chromium the Mutable from M19. Yep. Chromium the Mutable is a mythic rare from M19. It is a black, blue, a white, and 4 generic mana. It is 7 mana for a 7/7 legendary Elder Dragon. It has flash, it can't be countered, it has flying, and it also has discard a card : until end of turn. It becomes a human with base power and toughness 1/1, loses all abilities, and gains hexproof. It can't be blocked this turn. So it turns into an invisible stalker, essentially. There's a whole storyline about how it can, sort of blend itself into regular people, which is also great. But at the end of the day, they're like, look, if you're playing the Esper control deck, this is what you kill your opponent with. This is the one. Because no matter what, you should always have a card in hand to make sure that it doesn't die, and then you just kill your opponent with it. And that's how it works. And that to me is it's a nice, again, we're talking about a very modern design, very clean design, very much this is how this card works. I appreciate that. That's what Chromium's got.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I just love the shape-shifting dragon trope. From folklore, from mythology in general, is one of my favorites, and it's one of my favorite things to toy with in role-playing games. It was one of my favorite, spoiler alert, one of my favorite story arcs in the Critical Role arc from the last season. The fact that they were able to take that story from the Elder Dragons of way back in the day of 25 years ago and bring that into the forefront into a flavorful but also mechanically beneficial, interesting way to turn into a control finisher. I'm hoping Chromium sees some play. I'm hoping that it becomes a thing that sort of like Approach of the Second Sun and has its day in the sun of being able to be a control finisher in a competitive atmosphere.
Yeah, there was another card called Sphinx of the Final Word that was very close to my list.
Sure.
And it may very well be on other people's list, I don't know. But one of the reasons I didn't really choose it was, much like Chromium, or at least currently, it didn't really see a ton of play. It was very much sort of meant to be a thing, but never really got to be a thing. And I think Chromium, again, we're early in the format. M19 just come out. We have a year or so to go before this thing ever rotates anywhere. So
Chromium's a good flag bearer for the giant, 7+ mana, can't be countered giant, animal finishers like Chromium. Nezahal is another great example. Pearl Lake Ancient. We might reference some of these later on as well. But Chromium is definitely the most flavorful and interesting story-wise.
Well, the good thing about dragons is that even if it doesn't find a home in standard, dragons are known to have a lot of life in the casual format. So even if the standard players don't want it, it's probably going to have a really good time in EDH.
And absolutely. And you can do things like, let you discard cards for free, essentially. And you can do things with that, which is awesome. Move on here to number 9. Now, out of all of the control finishers in the whole world, somehow one of you guys and I have the exact same choice for number 9.
Oh, that's me and you.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, okay. And this is where I always like, I copied and pasted on Ruben's list. And I'm like,
Right.
Aaron, what is our number 9?
So our number 9 is a card that featured prominently, speaking of dragons, in the Esper Dragons list during Khans of Tarkir Standard. I have not always been a control player. You know, one of the things I've always really struggled with control decks is knowing when to turn the corner, you know, to make a pun off our finisher, our segment of our show. And, you know, I'm really good at like controlling things and like pinning you down like a frog in science class, but I never quite know when to close out the game until this card came along and is a very clear way to do that. And it also kind of embodies a sort of protect the queen style of control decks. You know, you were mentioning earlier, Ruben, how you define control, and some people define it with, you know, no creatures and having it just be man lands, and some people define a control deck by having, you know, one creature that's really, really hard to kill, and all you got to do is keep it alive and ride that creature to the finish line. And I really enjoy that style of deck, and this card really helped me understand that and helped me become a better control player. I had some of the best times playing this deck in Con Standard, and so our number 9 is Dragonlord Ojutai. Yeah. Evan, you can go ahead and tell the kids what it does.
Oh, it's so good. This was a mythic rare from Dragons of Tarkir. It's a white, a blue, and 3 generic mana for a 5/4 legendary Elder Dragon that has flying. It has hexproof as long as it's untapped. It doesn't have vigilance, no. So when you attack with it, it goes away.
Right.
Whenever Dragonlord Ojutai deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And this is a card that I have that great sort of memory from, and I've mentioned it before on the show, where Brad Nelson, and I believe it was Brian Braun-Duin, but it might have been somebody else, or maybe Todd Anderson. They went in there and they were playtesting decks. They were doing the SCG videos, and Brad came out and he was like, "Oh my god!" He was like, "Dragonlord Ojutai is insane." And I'm just like, "What?" Because when this card first showed up, now in hindsight, this card's insane, but when it first showed up, nobody thought it was that good. No. They're like, it's fine. It's going to lose the hexproof thing, so it's not good enough. It's like, no. When you hit one time and you get to do essentially the free impulse or impulse light, that's good enough. And that's usually enough to find something to make sure it doesn't die when they try to kill it, or to be able to bounce it or untap it or have another one or whatever. Like Dragonlord Ojutai won and has ended lots and lots of games, and it was great because, again, at the time it was like everyone thought it was fine, but Brad was like, no, this card is the truth, and it like top 8 the next weekend.
Yeah, it was a very good card. And the nice thing about all of those there were a lot of cards in the set that required you to like reveal a dragon, like Foul Tongue Invocation. And so the nice thing about these cards is that, you know, number one, you don't necessarily want to play it on turn 5. You want to make sure you have some mana open to protect it. But it also gave it while sitting in your hand, it still had a purpose as something you could reveal to like the Foul Tongues. And I know some people were playing with like Orator of Ojutai, like the little bird with Defender or whatever. And so those cards still had a purpose, even if they weren't ready to be cast yet. And so I just had a lot of fun with that. And that was really the deck that got me to enjoy playing control decks, and kind of leveled up as a player because of it.
Nice.
I, no joke, had Dragonlord Ojutai listed number 9 on my list for a good long time. It would have been hilarious if all 3 of us had exactly that at number 9, all 3.
And then you ruined it.
And then I ruined it.
Way to go, buddy.
Something else.
More like a Nojutai, am I right?
Wow.
Right.
Wow. All right. Ruben, what's your number 9?
I knew that Aaron specifically was going to have some love for the Esper Dragons, so I was like, I need to have some love for some of these other control decks from history. And mono black control in Odyssey Standard was so, and also during Odyssey Block, was a dominant force. I mean, 3 of the top 4 decks from Pro Tour Osaka in 2002 were mono black control. It's just a huge part of the format, and there were various different types. Honestly, Cabal Coffers could probably just be the card that I slot in here, but the card that I elected to choose is a personal favorite card of mine because I used to have a playset of the pre-release foil that was all in Russian because they looked super sweet. It was a 4 of in Olivier Ruel's deck at Pro Tour Osaka. So my next entrant into the control finisher list is Laquatus' Champion. Yes. Laquatus' Champion is my signal bearer of like big mono black finisher, right? Like I could have picked Shambling Swarm here. I could have picked Stalking Bloodsucker, Nantuko Shade. Like there's a bunch of stuff I could have picked, but man, Laquatus' Champion is just so cool. It's 4 colorless black for a 6/3 Nightmare Horror, a rare originally from Torment. When Laquatus' champion enters the battlefield, target player loses 6 life. When Laquatus' champion leaves the battlefield, that player gains 6 life. So it's that classic nightmare thing that was happening in Odyssey block. Oh, also it regenerates for a black mana. I just had so much fun with this card. Obviously, it's a big iconic piece from that standard that they brought back for Vintage Masters, and also for Masters 25 as one of the iconic cards from that set. I just love it, and I think that it's really emblematic of that era.
Well, I'm glad they reprinted that Masters 25. It's worth 11 cents.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
keep that value high, guys.
It's iconic doesn't mean that it's expensive. They can't all be winners. I just have I have an affinity for that card. Obviously, mono black control in standard didn't necessarily need the big creatures, so you could just play Corrupt and stuff like that when you were playing mono black in standard. And that deck was all about Mind Sludge and Mutilate and Swamp's Matter and all these other cool things. You used to Haunting Echoes your opponent. But yeah, Laquatus' champion just has a near and dear place in my heart.
Yeah, I will always. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I will always remember Laquatus' champion as the card that Aaron Forsyth beat my face in with during the Community Cup. I think we were doing the Vintage Cube or the Vintage Masters Cube or something like that. That set had just come out. It was Vintage Masters, I think. Mm-hmm. And I remember we had to draft that. And I remember that was the card he got me with. And it was just this powerhouse. And I think he was able to cheat it out faster than it was meant to come out. And I remember just that was the card. And so,
sure.
Forsyth.
Could have been something like Animate Dead or something else in that format.
I don't remember, but I just remember it coming out very quickly and going, uh-oh.
Yeah.
This is just one of those creatures that nowadays we're just like, oh, there's just a world. It's just a 6/3. That's just what it is.
It 6s you when it enters, man.
It's
That's no
mana.
joke.
It's 6 mana. These days,
it is a lot.
These days is too much. It's too much. But it is a very, very cool card. We went here to number 8. And we had mentioned it previously in terms of cards we were talking about. This card in particular I enjoy because, at least as I recall, I know I did. I'm fairly sure Brad Nelson also crapped on this card when we had it in our complete set review. We weren't super high on it, and it was fine. Again, this was the card in this block, in this set in particular, where Wizard says, she's like, this is your control finisher. Enjoy it. And it got there. It made it to the Pro Tour, and people played with it, and we couldn't really believe it, and we didn't really expect it. But sometimes you just need a big, giant sea monster to come beat your opponent's face. Pearl Lake Ancient showed up as a mythic in Khans of Tarkir. It's 2 blue and 5 generic mana for a 6/7 mythic Leviathan. Has flash. It can't be countered. It has prowess, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Return 3 lands you control to their owner's hand, return Pearl Lake Ancient to its owner's hand. So it was not unkillable, but very, very difficult to get rid of, much like the Chromiums of the world and some other creatures we'll talk about. But this was a card that, me and Brad were just like, lol, no one's going to pay 7 mana for a 6/7. Wait, they totally are, and it kill people.
Flash, man. It's got flash and it can't be countered. Like, what else do you need in a control finisher? Also, they stapled prowess onto it so that the mirrors wouldn't just be 6/7s blocking each other all day. I love it.
Yeah, we used to in Esper Dragons. I had this in the sideboard in the control mirrors because the surprisingly Ojutai is actually weaker than the Pearl Lakes, and I love the art of this card. The art is just so majestic. Like you see it just coming out of the water and kind of having like the arched back and the water like pooling out. It's gorgeous art. Gorgeous art.
It looks like a set piece for a like if you have a roller coaster that's dragon themed and you're like riding through the mists. This looks like it's a statue in the middle of that. Just an absolutely gorgeous piece.
Except it kills you.
My
favorite is the fact that it's a 6/7, but it has the prowess. So in control mirrors, it actually becomes really, really important as to whether or not you're going to block and whether they have it and all this other stuff.
Also, the prowess allows you to turn it into a 3-turn clock instead of a 4-turn clock.
Right.
Because the 6 requires, some additional points to get you down from 20. There were some really interesting knobs they twisted on Pearl Lake Ancient in development. I mean, it's a very development-heavy card, you can tell. And sometimes we poo-poo that and say, I'm not sure why all these numbers are the way they look. But this one they got right, I think.
Yeah, even though I poo-pooed it. I poo-pooed so hard.
Can't get them all right, man. Sometimes you eat the pie, and sometimes the pie. Wait, hold on.
Wait, that's the bear. Are we talking about bears now?
Work.
Wait, now we're doing the bear
sometimes
thing.
Sometimes you are the pie-er. Sometimes. Okay.
All right, Ruben, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is higher on someone else's list. It's my only higher.
Wow. All right, Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is also higher on somebody else's list.
Wow.
It's also my only higher.
I carried the water on this one now, didn't I?
Nice.
You were the Pearl Lake Ancient, just coming
There
out
you go.
carrying the,
Be like, I'm number 8, y'all. What's up?
There's a little bit of a family resemblance there with Pearl Lake
If
Ancient.
there's
Wow.
anybody watching, if there's anybody watching who's good at like computers or art, you need to staple Evan's head to a Pearl Lake Ancient. I would love to see that. Just hello,
They've got sort of that same grin on their face when they've got like a little snap.
Look, they don't have that kind of technology these days, so we don't know that. Nobody can do that type of manipulation. Let's move on here to number 7. Ruben, do you have one?
I do. I have a number 7, and this is a classic control finisher. And we've talked about a lot on various episodes of this show how, when someone resolves a Sphinx's revelation, Evan is really big on saying, the game's not over, but it's over, right? So I'm not sure Sphinx's revelation really qualifies as a finisher because it doesn't finish it by itself, even though the game's kind of over. Like, that's sort of like a 50-50. We'll see how people, that's sort of a little bit of a definition that we may discuss later. But Stroke of Genius is a bona fide finisher, and it does very similar things, but can also just end the game on the spot. Okay. So let's talk about Stroke of Genius. X, 2, and a blue, a rare from Urza's Saga. Target player draws X cards. That's it. That's a beautiful line of text is what that is. That is the original finisher for maybe the most beautiful control deck ever devised, Extended High Tide. And versions of it, things like
would those be combo decks
and other sort of control decks? A lot of them were combo decks, but you look at High Tide, that's a control deck. That's 4 Counterspell, that's 4 Force of Will, that's 2 Arcane Denial. That's setting up a control combo finish. You also played Stroke of Genius in all of those Academy decks, which those were definitely combo decks. But I think that High Tide is that's a control deck. That is a counter spell. Sit back, control the game until such a point that you can combo out. It was also a big part of all of those sort of blue-green, Gaea's Cradle, Squirrel, fill up your hand kind of decks. There were lots of decks that used it as a control finisher. It is also the first card I ever saw in foil. I think it might have been the first ever card that I ever physically saw or held or saw in a case in foil. It was a Judge gift card foil in 1998 before Urza's Legacy came out. And so you could get foils of Stroke of Genius back in the day. Just a classic card in all manner of decks, but specifically in that High Tide deck that really... you would target yourself to draw extra cards to be able to build up until you had the critical mass, and then you would finish them out by decking them with a massive stroke.
Woo! Yeah, make them draw all the cards. Excuse me, and and then they died because they drew too many cards. They got too strokey on their genius.
Yeah, I mean, basically, anytime you have a deck in around the year 2000 through the year 2007. Anytime in extended or standard, if you had a deck that made a lot of mana, be it World Gorger Dragon combo or Power Artifact or Candelabra decks, Academy, New Academy, Mind Over Matter, High Tide, any of those decks, that was a Stroke of Genius deck. Wow. And that really says finisher to me.
Aaron, what's your number 7?
My number 7 was an important piece of Ben Stark's top 8 deck from Pro Tour Get to remember Gate Crash. Back in 2013. We've talked about creatures that can help you win the game. We've talked about sorcery that can help you win the game. Let's talk about a land that can help you win the game. Now, when people think of lands in control decks, they often think of man lands, which we might talk about later in the show, like Shambling Vent. Mana sinks you can pour your mana into when you have nothing else to do, and they turn into creatures. And in theory, if you're playing a control deck, people are going to board out their removal against you, and so you can take advantage of that and kill them with these man lands. But this is a land that does not turn into a creature. This is a land that just does something awful that makes you feel very bad. There's a lot of puns. There's one pun in particular regarding the name of this card. My number 7 is Nephalia Drownyard, also known as Nephalia Frownyard, because it feels terrible when you get milled to death because of this thing. So Nephalia Drownyard is a land from Innistrad. It says tap. You can add 1 colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 1 colorless, a blue, and a black, and tap it to have target player put the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. And so the Esper control decks would run like a couple Snapcasters, like some Augur Boluses, and then that's it. And maybe like a Snapcaster, Augur, Restoration Angel, and then they'd run like a pair of Nephalia Drownyards. And so if God forbid you dealt with the creatures, they'll just mill you to death. And so you have a lot of mana. You're able to. I don't think there was really any land destruction in that standard, so this thing was just able to run unchecked. And so end of turn mill you, end of turn mill you. That's 3 6 cards. It adds up, and then it's just a really horrible way to die, and you really do feel essentially like you're drowning, where just little by little you're running on borrowed time, you're losing air. And I've been on the receiving end of this. It feels terrible, and I just haven't seen anything really like it since then. They've gone back to kind of the manland thing, but this was a thing. This was real.
I mean, if they didn't have Ghost Quarter or whatever.
Ghost Quarter was the only answer really in that standard.
That was supposed to be the fix, and if you didn't get it or if you milled them away.
The problem with Ghost Quarter was that all those control decks most of them were 3 colors, and so you really couldn't afford a Ghost Quarter. Yeah. I remember that Reed Duke, I believe, won an SCG Invitational with a 4-color, sort of like Bant, Nephalia Drownyard, like Thragtusk thing. That I vaguely remember this. I was reporting on this was the Invitational that was in LA, I think. This was like Nephalia Drownyard was Nick Spagnolo's like calling card and all those Shaheen Sarani. This was this era where control mages were like, oh my god, this is everything I ever wanted. And then of course Melissa DeTora turned that all on its head when she top 8'd and was like, instead of a Drownyard, why don't I just kill you with these Kessick Wolf runs? Like this Drownyard's taken too long. I'm just going to attack you with a 20 power Thrag Tusk. Oh,
Ruben, you are in classic Tater fashion tonight, sir.
Drownyard certainly ended a lot of games. Man. All right. Well,
wow.
There's that.
Like he's tearing so hard. I don't know if you're watching, but if you aren't, imagine that like weird, like sort of Max Headroom where like he's really slow and then he starts really fast and he like sort of catches up to himself. That's what you're doing. It's really crazy.
That does it. It does it every once in a while for me on your end as well.
Sure. That means your internet sucks.
Yeah.
So
I'm plugged in, so whatever.
Dude, this ain't Ready Player One. Come on, man. It's fine.
Nephalia Spudyard.
Wow. This card, my number 7 in particular, was a card, as I recall, Zach Hill talked a lot about how he worked on this card, about how he had worked on this card in development. Again, Wizards, they want to have these types of things in formats. They want to give you the option of you're playing the control mirror or you're the control deck and you need to win the game at some point. And God bless it, Dragon's Maze sucked. Okay? Dragon's Maze was super crazy. It was one of the worst sets ever made. But Aetherling showed up in it. And Aetherling is a control finisher's finisher. This is a card that harkens back to a card I'm sure we'll talk about at some point later. But that said, Aetherling from Dragon's Maze is a rare, which means it's worth nothing because it's a rare from Dragon's Maze. It's 2 blue, 4 generic mana for a 4/5 rare shapeshifter. It has 4 abilities. Blue, exile Aetherling. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Blue, Aetherling is unblockable this turn. 1 generic mana, it gets +1/-1 until end of turn, or 1 generic mana, it gets -1/+1 until end of turn. So this kind of does all the things. You can pay a blue to make it unblockable. You pay 4 mana. You can ding them for 8 and say, go. This is a 3-turn clock in and of itself. This is the creature you put all of your mana into. This is the finisher of that format. was still kind of bad. You only played like one of them.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot. You know, this just kind of is what it is. Yeah. And it's Dragon's Maze.
This was my number 8.
Nice. This is also my number 8.
Nice!
Yay! I was playing a black-green rock in that standard, and I just remember how frustrating it was trying to deal with that thing because, you know, hoping that they tap out that last blue so that they can't afford to blink it, or just hoping that you can sort of race it or do whatever you needed to do. But this was my first taste of a card like this. I wasn't around for Morphling, and I was like, this was just a really difficult card. And yeah, and again, this just sort of, you know, the one thing that the creatures like this have in common is sort of either being unblockable or being very big and being very evasive, where you either can't target them because of hexproof or they simply blink. And so this was my first taste of that kind of finisher, and boy, was it annoying.
Yeah, this card has a power level in and of itself in terms of what it's trying to do.
Mm-hmm. It had its era, and it was exactly the definition of a control finisher.
And you're right, though. That was very much I talked earlier about the Protect the Queen kind of style control deck. Aetherling was really shined in what I call the Bore Me to Tears control deck, where it's like one creature. This was literally, we're not kidding, this was at times the only creature in the deck. Yeah. And the rest were spells. They'd run Elixir of Immortality, and their whole job was to bore you to death. And if that didn't work, okay, fine, I'll kill 72 turns and then drop an Aetherling. And
Elixir came close to making to my top 10 also.
That card really was annoying. I mean, Aetherling was a card that you only played when you had 8 mana because you had to be able to play it and blink it, and then if they had another answer, you had to be able to blink it twice.
Blink it again. Yeah.
And then you're okay. Because after that, once you untap with a bunch of mana on Aetherling, like, GG, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no split second in that format. You just died to it. And yet another, we have a same out of all the control finishers in the world in Magic. You guys both had the same number 8, and we had the same number 9. Yeah. Very nice.
Gotcha.
We'll move on here to number 6. Ruben, what's your number 6?
My number 6 is a card that has been a control finisher of, lots of different control decks over the years, but most famously probably in Astral Slide style decks, particularly Julian Neuton's Worlds winning deck in 2004. Certainly has also been a big factor in land still style decks, has seen a smattering of play in other, extended Tron, blue-white Tron, even had its day in the sun in Legacy in a deck affectionately referred to as the Mighty Quinn for those Legacy aficionados out there. So my number 6 is Eternal Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Eternal Dragon is a rare from Scourge originally. 5 colorless white dragon spirit. It's a 5/5. It has flying. It has plane cycling of 2, which says that you can pay 2 and discard it from your hand to search your library for a planes card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And also has the ability, pay 3 colorless white, return Eternal Dragon from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. So basically, as long as you had 1,000,000 mana, Eternal Dragon was where you wanted to be. Because not only could you could cycle it or plane cycle it to build towards your eventual engine, either alongside Astral Slide or alongside your land still Pillow Fort strategy, playing your land drops, getting all your lands into play, eventually returning Eternal Dragon and getting another land once you're around 7, 8, 9 lands. And then once you have enough in play, you can be, all right, here's my 5/5. And even if it dies, who cares? Just bring it back for another 5 mana. Eternal Dragon has been a huge part of lots of different decks over the years, and especially in those Astral Slide decks.
When I was playing Living End in Modern, I used to dream every day that I could have this someday. Like, why isn't this Modern legal? Because that's sort of the dream, that you want to play these land cyclers and then be able to cast Living End and get them all back. And I used to go through Gatherer, brewing and tinkering. Just, why can't I have this?
Yep. I mean, this is one of those creatures that, like, today looks kind of sad and, like, weirdly overcosted. And it's kind of all the ways. Like, these days, you'd be able to do that ability anytime you could cast a sorcery, I feel. Not just during your upkeep where they try to kind of cripple you for your turn, essentially, versus having it be a thing you can do on your turn. 7 mana for a 5/5 flyer. Not that great. It's like, these are the old school stats. And yet, this was huge. Like, when this was good.
Oh, absolutely.
It was really good. Like, it was crazy good compared to what you had at the time.
Yeah.
Often would fight alongside Akroma's Vengeance as the big wrath of the format, and another control finisher, Decree of Justice, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm not sure we'll discuss it, but I wanted to give it a shout out there to make 1,000,000 angels or 1,000,000 soldiers.
I know, right? Scourge, the set that had 4 dragons in it, Dragon's Maze, had no dragons in it. Aaron, what's number 6?
When people think of Tron, they think of turn 3 Karns. They think of a very redundant deck with Expedition Maps and Sylvan Scrying and Ancient Stirrings to help you get Urza Tron online as quickly as possible, which is usually turn 3, and then you're able to get your Wormcoil engines and your World Breakers and your Ulamogs and things like that. And that's usually what people think of. But in Modern, there's also a mono blue variant, which is not as concerned about getting Tron online as quickly as possible. They're looking to sort of stall you with counter spells while they find their Urza pieces. And if they happen to find them, great, but if not, they usually have, enough basic islands and other things too. They'll get there eventually, but the way that they want to do it is more by stalling you with counter spells. And so it tends to play out more like a control deck. And we've covered, a land that helps you win the game. We've covered a creature that helps you win the game, a sorcery that helps you win the game. Let's go ahead and name an artifact. My number 6 is Mindslaver. Yep. So Mindslaver is 6 colorless. It's a legendary artifact. You can pay 4 colorless and tap it, sacrifice Mindslaver, you control target player's next turn. So one of the ways that Mono Blue Tron likes to win is by comboing this with Academy Ruins. And so essentially you create a lock where you're just never going to have another turn again. Like I will always have your turn and I will always have my turn and you are just never going to play again. And most players know enough to scoop it up, but some players are like, you're going to play it out. It's like, all right, fine. But this is essentially how they want to win the game. And so this is a really neat take on control. We've talked about kind of having the I win spell. We've kind of talked about the land, but this is really an artifact that sort of locks up the game in a really neat way. And I just love watching a Mindslaver lock go down.
This is a card that they've only printed it twice. As a rare in Mirrodin and the mythic rare and Scars of Mirrodin. It's still worth $4, which again, for a casual card that doesn't see infinite play, that's actual decent dollars.
And in decks that it sees play, you only play in 1, maybe 2.
Yeah.
So.
Right. And this is also one of those very classic, I think one day you're literally going to have sort of a Rosewaterian tale of, it was against the odds and the effect was too great and the rules manager said it couldn't be done and there's a boss said you're crazy and everybody in R&D said, have you lost your mind, Mark? And he's like, no, I'm going to give him the other player's turn. It's going to be incredible. And they finally figured out a way to do it in the rules and everybody loved it. Woo! And they won and it's confetti. It's incredible. And that's a Rosewaterian tale of how he makes Magic cards.
I also have this in my Muldrotha deck because obviously you can keep getting it back and be like, just keep taking turns and good stuff.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely terrific.
I also love Mindslaver because it is always the story of they gave Mindslaver to the Magic the Gathering online team about 5 months before the set was to be programmed online and said, by the way, this is going to be a thing. And Magic Online team basically was like, how dare you? And then they spent the next 3 months trying to program Mindslaver for Magic Online, which was great.
Well, I remember that even being an issue with Emrakul too, that sort of ability or that effect, and that being very troublesome for them to kind of recreate that.
Right. They read it, a little pee came out. There was some sadness, tears. Some people had to be like, be sheltered. All right. So, but they got there. Like Mindslaver works fine on Magic Online, and I'm sure it would work great on Magic Arena if they ever got around to it.
Yeah.
That said,
just caught that.
It's fine. Number 6 for me, and this is a card that you've actually brought up before, Aaron. In that it's a very awesome card that just kills people really quickly. I don't want to say oppressive, but I mean clearly for what it's doing, it's very powerful. It's just a creature. It's a she. It's a very, very powerful angel, and sometimes you have to name colors, and that color is cut off by Iona, Shield of Emeria, who is 3 white, 6 generic mana for a 7/7 mythic legendary angel originally from Zendikar. As she enters the battlefield, you choose a color and your opponents cannot cast spells of the chosen color. I'm casting her and I'm going to name the right color. You have to name the right color.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes name the wrong color in Cube and then you look stupid. Because you're like, I'm going to name this color. And then they're like, removal spell. And I'm like, oh, dang it. That's dumb.
Rats.
That's horrible because this is a flying monster. She is a huge killing machine. She's a 3-turn clock. Again, name the right color and you're good. And then she's your buddy. She's your pal. and she wins games in 3 turns.
Yeah, definitely saw play in those blue-white decks. I typically see her as more of a reanimation target,
She is,
as opposed to a control finisher. That line sort of gets blurred a little bit, especially as you get into the older formats. But I've definitely hardcast some Ionas, and she is definitely a good way to end some games.
Especially in Modern, I think in the Gifts Rights deck, you're playing something like Gifts Ungiven, which plays very much like a control deck. You're buying a lot of time, and then you go into the late game, you got an Unburial Rights and Iona. And there you are. And so, going back to the different shades of control decks, that's another one, control that leads to reanimation.
Yeah. So Iona is really super sweet. But we're going to reach here into our top 5.
Ooh.
I don't have one because it's higher on someone else's list. And you know what? I'm totally okay with that because I like this card a lot. So it's okay that it's higher.
Well, good news, because my number 5, I share with someone else who I guess we have some hilarious share cycles happening between our hosts today. Would you like to discuss, or shall I?
You can start, and I'll go ahead and I'll talk about what the card does when you're done.
Great.
Okay.
So this card is sort of like a flag bearer of a lot of different cards, but I think that this one is really it's the creature land when you think of control finisher. I mean, we've had land still decks in the past with things like Mishra's Factory and Mutavault, and those have sort of had their era in the sun, but I think that there's a different tier once you get to cards like Celestial Colonnade, when you talk about control finishers as lands, as part of your mana base. And so Celestial Colonnade is our number 5.
Yeah, nice. Celestial Colonnade is a land from the World Wake. It says it enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to make either a white or blue mana. You can also pay 3 colorless, a white and a blue. Until end of turn, Celestial Colonnade becomes a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature with flying and vigilance. It's still a land, so it can attack, it can block. This is the ideal mana sink. This is one of those cards that, when you're playing against control in Modern, you're always keeping an eye out for certain bench points where it's like, okay, they've got their blue and their colorless, we're in Cryptic Command territory. The game plays very differently from that point on. And likewise, there's the Celestial Colonnade benchmark where it's like, okay, they have enough mana to do something and still pour mana into this. You play the game differently at that point as well. Like Evan mentioned, this is something that sees play in the land still decks in Vintage. This is something that, the Jeskai decks play, going for $60 right now too. This is a card that has not been reprinted. Like, this is the only printing.
Well, interestingly, and this is something that's actually going on right now. If you listen to this in the future, I'm curious how they handle it. But right now, we're in the middle of buy a box promo hell, where Nexus of Fate has turned out to be a playable card, at least in one tournament. We don't even know if it's going to make another one, but by God, it made the Pro Tour and everyone lost their minds. Yeah. And if you go back, you also note that World Wake had a buy a box promo for a Celestial Colonnade. This was the original, buy a box promos originally were just sort of like souped up, cute foil versions of existing rares in the set. And this was the one for World Wake. And this thing is already like $70 for the buy a box promo. And for people today who are just like, why couldn't they just make it like an existing card? It's like, because it doesn't work. It didn't work like they wanted it to. They wanted it to be like, you want to get this buy a box promo because I got to spend my money right here at the friendly local game store. And it wasn't good enough. And so, clearly Celestial Colonnade was, and this is a different, example, but regardless, this is a extremely, extremely powerful land. This entire cycle, worried Wizards. They thought they had pushed it way too far when they went back and made the other lands for Battle for Zendikar. They were nowhere near as close in power level as these things. These things were huge. They've seen play in Legacy. These cards are very, very powerful, and this card is worth a ton of money because they just haven't reprinted it. For God's sakes, put it in the next Master set already. We need more copies of it. This land is great.
Look at the myriad of decks over history, not just still in Modern with your blue, white, red Jeskai kind of, or just generic blue, white control, but you go all the way back through history. You see them in various Caw-Blade decks. You see them in various twin decks over the years. You see them in next level Bant from way back in the day. The amount of decks in which Celestial Colonnade services as a finisher is just kind of staggering.
Yeah, it is incredibly powerful land, and I've always loved playing with it.
And the fact that its vigilance is actually hugely relevant for the one white mana removal from Path to Exile was extremely relevant all the time. We're leaving up counterspell mana after attacking for 4. Just an incredibly powerful land.
All right, so we'll move on here to number 4. And number 4 is also a card that we spoke of previously, at least for me. And it's a card that made my top 5 because I am convinced it's not always the thing that necessarily kills you that kills you. And Ruben, you know and I know.
Yeah, I mean, we talked.
End of your turn, if I cast Sphinx's Revelation and that thing resolves, you're dead. You've lost the game. You may not know it. You may think you're cool. You may think you got outs. You don't. You don't. Yeah. The door has shut because untap Rev, that game is 100% over. I have never seen anyone get out of that. You're just done.
Yep.
Sphinx's Revelation is an amazing card. This card is so sick. This is a card where I've had conversations with R&D members who are just like, look, would you rather have a Delver-esque style of deck be very good or a Sphinx's Revelation style deck be very good? And I'm like, please the Delver. Please give me the tempo. Give me the bounce. Give me the whatever. Give me a mana leak before you give me this stupid card that you think you're still in the game, and yet you're not. And yet the door already shut turns ago. Sphinx's Revelation is a 2 blue, white, and X spell. Very simple, straightforward. It is a mythic rare from Return to Ravnica that says, instant, you gain X life and you draw X cards. And that's it. At the end of your turn, you gain X life and draw X cards.
It says something about the power level of that card when we still haven't recovered from it. Like, look at the draw spells we've been given since. We've been given Ugin's Insight, Jace's Ingenuity, Pull from Tomorrow. Pull from Tomorrow is close, but not quite there. Glimmer of Genius. Like, look at the quality of the blue draw spells we've been given. We will never have it that good again. And you can tell that they're still terrified of going anywhere close to that. I mean, we had Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, and that was cute. But you can just tell in the way that they design these cards now that they're so terrified of that happening again. And some people have even gone so far as to argue that Control and Standard has never been the same. Like, those were the good days where like that Azorius control, that Jeskai control, and even that Esper control going back to the Ben Stark list. Those were like the good days of Control and Standard, and that every control deck since then has been fine, but like those were the good old days.
I mean, it's tough to say that control decks are just fine when the Citrus Assassin just like completely decimates the entire Pro Tour with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Hieroglyphic Illumination as his draw spell. You know, so but you're completely right. Like, we're never getting. You were famous for saying we're never getting Sphinx's Revelation. We got a Sphinx that can do a Sphinx's Revelation, but that's not Sphinx's Revelation. No. That's not a thing that's ever going to happen again. We're never going to get like X black, blue, draw X cards, target player loses X life. Like, we're never getting that. We're never getting anything close to Sphinx's Revelation ever again.
Right, that's just like Sphinx's Vomit or something. That's weird.
Yeah. Or X, what would it be? It would be like X red, blue, deal X to a creature or a planeswalker, draw X card.
I like that.
To any target. Any target.
No. It can't be Fireball. We can't end of turn Fireball.
Why not? That'd be fantastic. All right.
Evan, please.
Come on. It would be fun. It would bring
R&D doth not know what they do.
Well,
with
and
Sphinx's Revelation.
No, they didn't. And my God, and I don't think, again, it's weird to sort of harken back to Return to Ravnica as like the good old days, because for me, Return to Ravnica was very much a modern set released in a modern world under modern design philosophies, and yet it was busted.
I remember the first time I played in Return to Ravnica Standard, and I was like, I was playing like an aggro red deck, because I'm Ruben Bressler, and I was like, I wonder what this format's going to be like, and my opponent went Hallowed Fountain, tap, go, and I was like, all right, here's a 1-drop, and then they were like, Clifftop Retreat, here's an Azorius Charm, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm never playing Magic ever again for the rest of my life. This is the worst. Everyone has perfect mana for everything ever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my first round, and then every round thereafter for about a year.
But you had Rakdos Cackler, you had Hell Rider. Those were good days for you, too.
Those were good days for me. I was not want for good little red men.
Well, you think Nicol Bolas the Ravager is good now, these days. Wait till you get the sick mana. Wait till you get the perfect
wait till
shock
we
lands.
Get some Ravnica lands. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be insane. Ruben, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is the original Control finisher. All right? There is no card that says, this is the way I'm going to grind you out, literally and figuratively, quite like a Millstone. It won the first Pro Tour. It brought about the term that we even use for putting cards from your opponent's library into their graveyard. You mill them with a Millstone.
Wow.
Millstone is a 2 colorless mana artifact that's been printed 100 billion times.
Mm-hmm.
It is currently an uncommon available in the M19 expansion. Pay 2 colorless and tap. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. That's it. That's all you need to do. Obviously, Pro Tour 1 was won by Michael Laquatus. He had sort of more of a hybrid control deck. He could win with one of Evan's favorite finishers, Blinking Spirit, in addition to Millstone, or he had a couple other things. He had like Mishra's Factories and stuff. But if you look at the top 8 list, you look at more stuff like Sean Rayner's top 8 list, his win condition was Millstone, and like that was it. Like the plan was Millstone. It was like Wrath you, Counterspell you, Swords your creatures, destroy your other stuff, and mill you. Like that was the plan, and that was how it went for a while. You would just have these slow, grindy blue-white control decks that all they wanted to do was establish a board presence and then slowly but surely turn your library into dust.
Yeah, they kept this card rare through 10th edition.
Yeah.
This card's worth like 10 cents, and that's being aggressive.
It's a rough card in Limited. It was a rough card in Limited for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And then they figured out Limited a little bit better, and they sped up the format so that the aggro decks could keep up in a 40-card format with the Tome Scour style Millstone decks, and so they could bring it down to uncommon. But yeah.
And there is usually a mill style win condition in different limited formats, including M19. There is that card where when you draw a card, your opponent mills 2 cards. And again, I'm literally over here talking about milling because it has begun from antiquities.
It's a verb, yeah.
It's so fun because like the original Millstone is Kaja Foglio having a rock in stars. And it's like we had rock in stars until like 5th edition, and then finally in 6th or 7th edition they replaced it.
Now we have the weird, like it's like a head engraved in a mountain, and like
I love that thing where it's like grinding down the head eventually.
Yeah,
like your brain eventually is just it turned into grist.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
This is the old school. This is the original, the OG control finish, because we ain't doing anything here but chilling out with our ivory towers. So you might as well mill them to death.
Yep,
that's what they did because the rocks were soft, kind of like the Millstone.
Right. Okay. There you go. Perfect.
Aaron, what's your number 4?
The problem with the mechanic like Miracle is that eventually it gets to the point where it's not miraculous anymore, where in older formats especially, you can kind of decide when you want the miracle to happen. In Standard, I don't remember too clearly, but in Standard, I don't recall having very many ways or any ways to be able to sort of stack your deck. But when you start getting into Legacy and Vintage, you have things like Ponder and Preordain and Brainstorm and ways to Jace the Mind Sculptor. And so when you want a miracle, you can set up a miracle, and up until recently we had Sensei's Divining Top. And so this card by itself is quite strong. The feeling of getting it randomly feels very nice, but in a control deck, when you decide that you're just ready to win the game, you can go ahead and close out that game, and that's a very powerful thing to be able to do. My number 4 is Entreat the Angels. So Entreat the Angels is a sorcery from Avacyn Restored originally. Costs X, and 3 white. You can put X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, or you can pay its miracle cost for 1X and 2 white, which says you can cast this card for its miracle cost when you draw it if it's the first card you drew this turn. So Miracles and Legacy, for example, so you would draw the game out with your counter spells, with your Swords to Plowshares, with your Terminus, and then when you have your opponent over a barrel, you set it up with your top, and you're like, I think I'm ready to kill you now. Here's 4 angels, and it's very easy to close out the game that way. This was very big in Standard, thanks to Alexander Hayne, who was known for sort of making miracles a thing in Standard. They are now picking up on this in Modern. You're seeing even a blue-white Miracles deck go through some early stages in Modern that people have been playing around with. And so this is very, very real. It's been reprinted, I think, 3 times in addition to Avacyn Restored. We've even gotten a black version recently in the latest Commander set, Entreat the Dead, which I'm a huge fan of. But yeah, this is a great control finisher, and what makes it so dangerous is that you can decide when you want to do it thanks to your normal blue everyday cantrips.
Yeah, miracles are kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Miracle is a mechanic that is inherently exciting. Okay, as a Timmy, as someone who likes to watch Magic, there's no doubt like seeing the bonfire being thrown up or seeing the Entreat showing up at the top of the deck is a cool, exciting experience for everybody but the other player. And the other player is
makes
just
for great TV.
Oh my God! And the other player is just in anguish of just like, for real, serious. Go on, Google up bonfire LSV Kibler and look at the GIF and check out the faces, and that's just one of those classic moments in Magic, and that's what Miracles essentially gave us. So in many ways, I appreciate the mechanic and what it's doing. And the other half, it makes me hate life and all existence when I lose to a card like Entreat the Angels, where you're like, wow, you just paid 5 mana for your 3/4/4 flyers. Great, that's terrific. And you stacked your deck while you're doing it too. That's awesome. Thanks.
The Angels has had a long and illustrious history of being a control finisher, obviously in Alexander Haynes Pro Tour winning block deck at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, and obviously being in Legacy for being Miracles was the dominant force in Legacy for 3-4 years. Yeah. It was replaced a little bit by Monastery Mentor, and obviously Jace the Mind Sculptor and other Planeswalkers could sort of be the finisher in that case, but Entreat the Angels certainly the most potent of those varieties and ended the games. Shout out to finishers that know how to end the game quick, by the way. Good job to Pearl Lake Ancient and Entreat the Angels. I don't want to sit here for 85 hours with your Elixir of Immortalities and you're pinging me for ones.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of bore me to tears control. Like, I got a phone to charge, I got emails to read. Let's wrap it up. Gotta pick the kids up and consider.
Like, I like a Keranos God of Storms, and I can appreciate that that's a finisher, but I got lunch to eat. Like, I want stuff. I got things to do. Like, let's end the game already.
Oh, man. Let's move on here to number 3, which I don't have one because it's higher on someone else's list. So I currently have 2 hires that are either going to be on this number 3 or number 2 and number 1. So y'all have some good taste. I just wanted to let you know that. Got good taste. What's your number 3, Aaron?
So my number 3 is a card that people wanted to do things with. They were trying it furiously in Standard. They were trying it in Modern, and it didn't really see any play in Modern. People tried. In Standard, it saw play mostly as a sideboard card in mirror matches as a way to sort of close out the game very quickly. Or if you were playing a control deck and you had run kind of late in the game, you were close to going to time, you would bring this thing in as a way to kind of wrap things up, as a way to kind of close out a game 3 and make sure that you could win the game in time. Where this card really started to shine is in Vintage, where it ended up being good enough to be restricted. And it also sees play in Legacy. Sometimes the Miracles lists, they would kind of bounce between putting it in the main, putting it in the side, but Miracles really likes this card as well. And it's just so fascinating to me that the card just did nothing in like the first 2 formats and then just busted out as a huge, Vintage monstrosity. Number 3 is Monastery Mentor. So Monastery Mentor is 2 colorless and a white. It's a creature type human monk with prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you can put a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess onto the battlefield. It's a 2/2. So in a format with free things like Moxen, free box token prowess triggers, or you play something like Paradoxical Outcome and then whoop 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 and then drop it all over again. This card gets out of hand so fast. This is the primary win condition in a lot of the Vintage decks. It's the only win condition they have, and so they'll just dig, find it, and then it just runs away with the game so fast. And good enough to be restricted in Vintage, sees play in Legacy, nothing in Modern. A little bit of play in Standard, but a card is powerful when it can shoot straight to the top, to the most powerful format, and be good enough to be restricted.
As a 3-mana 2/2, like it's a 3-mana 2/2.
It's a gray ogre.
But even then, you crack a Black Lotus and do this on turn 1. Bye.
Yeah, right.
It's been real, Mox dude, whatever.
Or just cycle your tops over and over again.
Absolutely.
We all like our tops to do things, and of course that's
do whatever
that's
they
a great
want.
way to do it. Be sure to pick up your Ruben Bressler Monk Prowess tokens from our Dominaria set review, which are the Monastery Mentor Mentor tokens there. Only 2 creatures have been restricted in Vintage. One of them is Lodestone Golem. The other one, Monastery Mentor.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, it is very, very powerful. However, Ruben, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is it's the closest I came, I think, to a card that isn't necessarily always a finisher, isn't always going to end the game. But you know what? I'm not sure I've ever seen this card resolved. and then the player then proceed to not win from that point. It's an 11 for 1. It is the go-to when you think, this is the big splashy sorcery that I'm going to use to completely decimate my opponent. This is everything I ever want. It's life, it's cards, it's removal, it's all of the things. And it's also got the classic flavor text.
There's always a higher power.
Always a greater power.
Yeah.
Number 3 is Cruel Ultimatum.
Oh, man.
Listen to this beautiful. Oh, my God. Listen to this line. Just makes me feel so warm and fuzzy inside for the low cost of blue, black, red, which, by the way, is the license plate, I believe, of UUBBBRR, I think is our good buddy Z-Bag's license plate.
Yes.
Yep.
Great state of Washington. Shout out to Z-Bag. And yeah, that's the casting cost. And for that cost, you're probably going to want something good. Well, I have good news for you. For that cost, for a sorcery, target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, then loses 5 life. You return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, you draw 3 cards, and then you gain 5 life. How in the world you ever going to recover from a Cruel Ultimatum? You're not. That's just it's not going to happen. Obviously, one of the most probably top 5 coverage moments of all time is when Gabriel Nassif was lining up his Cruel Ultimatum mana in the finals of the finals of Pro Tour Kyoto in 2009. Drew his 1 remaining Cruel Ultimatum and laid it out on the table to get back that Broodmate Dragon and bring it back. Grixis control, 5-color control, Quicken Toast, all of those different decks. Teachings, there's a Cruel Control deck in Modern that sees a little bit of play. Old Extended, obviously, was very popular. It just warms my heart and has excellent foreshadowing for Nicol Bolas, who became recently the biggest, baddest evil guy in the Magic storyline. Just love it all the way around.
It's like a hug from Bolas.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like
this card has one of the most devoted followings I've ever seen. And it's part of a cycle, and yet none of the other cards garner any attention. And there are just certain cards in the community that, even though they're not necessarily tier 1 strategies or they're not terribly popular, Vengevine's another one. There are people that have been dying for a tier 1 Vengevine deck and have been waiting patiently, and maybe they found it in the recent Pro Tour. But
I was just going to say, good news for Vengevine fans.
This is another one of those cards that people are so hyped for, and you see license plates and T-shirts and tattoos and Twitter handles, and this is just one of those cards that you're like, of all the cards, on God's green earth, this is the one that you stand for, and I love it. But it's just like, I would have never guessed.
There is always a greater power, and it is always willing to smack you down and to make you look dumb.
We didn't know. It's easy to forget that when Shards of Alara came out, which is when this card was out, we didn't have Bolas yet. Bolas wasn't back yet. This was a shadow of Bolas, and people were like, is Bolas coming back? What's happening? This was sort of, Eldritch Moon before Eldritch Moon came out. It was like, who's the big bad evil guy? Like, who's going to be the Thanos in part 2 of whatever? So,
and cut to 2018 where it's all Bolas all the time.
It's all Bolas all the time.
Now we're just mono Bolasing. I'm ready to go back to Phyrexia, please. Can I see Yawgmoth?
I'll tell you what, I'm ready for Cruel Ultimatum to come back, is what I want.
Heyo. No. Look, first of all, can you tell me what Clarion Ultimatum does?
That's the Bant one.
Okay.
Side note, I'm changing my drag name to Clarion Ultimatum.
I think Clarion Ultimatum is the one where it's like you choose 5 permanents in play, and then you search your library for 5 cards with those names and put them into play, or something like that.
But how do you put them into play?
I don't know. You cast them.
Tapped. It's fine because you got most of it. You got most of it. You did well.
You did. Good job.
Okay.
I'm impressed, honestly.
Violent Ultimatum destroys 3 permanents.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant Ultimatum is like a fact or fiction, sort of.
Mm-hmm. It's a fact. It's a FOF, essentially. Remove the top 5 cards from the game. They put them in 2 piles, and you get one.
There's another Ultimatum of some kind.
Oh, except you may play any number of cards from one of those piles without paying. You may play any number from one of those piles without paying their mana cost, and Titanic, of course, make all your guys ridiculously huge.
Right. +5/+5 and a billion abilities.
First strike, lifelink, trample, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the wedge versions,
Ooh.
I know, right? What does a Sultai, type ultimatum?
Ultimatum.
Ultimatum. I love that. A Mardumatum. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. Well, Cruel Ultimatum was my number 5. I do think this is the top 5 control finishers. You don't come back from Cruel Ultimatum. Like, it's cute that, like, you're adjusting your life total and, you're discarding cards and you're doing stuff. No, you've lost. That game is over. Like, it's not. Right. And again, for me, I put it below.
It's possible that I've pulled off a couple of victories where my opponent was like already at 2 and I already had like 8 creatures in play. Sure. And then they cast it and I had to sacrifice one of my Kithkin and then they went up to 13 and I could still attack them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's very few and far between.
It's tough.
It's a lot like Sphinx's Revelation, where like once a tournament, Jerry Thompson was famous for saying, once a tournament, when you use Sphinx's Revelation for 8, you're going to whiff. You're going to draw 7 lands and an Azorius Charm and then cycle into an 8th land. And so you better hope that happens before the top 8 because it's going to happen once a tournament.
Nice.
But yeah, it's very similar with Cruel Ultimatum.
All right. So, and I put that as my number 5. I thought Sphinx's Revelation was a little bit better in terms of, like, again, I think it's even more difficult to lose with Sphinx's Revelation than it is Cruel Ultimatum. That said, let's move on here to number 2. Aaron, what is your number 2?
So when I first started playing Legacy and Vintage, there were cards that I knew to be powerful, but they weren't necessarily powerful against the decks that I was playing. So they had reputations. And so I remember when I first started playing Vintage, I had a couple of girlfriends on Skype with me and we were going through a Vintage league, and I would cast Cabal Therapy and I would see someone's hand and I'd be like, "Oh, that's that." And they'd be like, yeah, you don't care about that. And I'd be like, "Okay." And I just go about my business. But then when other people would watch me play, they would have the opposite reaction. "Oh my God, that's so-and-so." And it's like, yeah, but I don't care about that. But to other people, it's a very big deal. If you're able to cheat this thing out on turn 1 with Moxen or Black Lotus, this is another card that we've used the phrase "you're dead and you don't know it yet" throughout this show as a way to describe multiple finishers. And this card certainly applies, where it doesn't necessarily kill you, but if it drops early enough, or hell, even if it drops on time, you're effectively on a clock. Not really me though, because I don't really care about it, but it does have a reputation for being powerful. So powerful, in fact, that it was banned in Modern up until recently, where it has done nothing since then, which is fantastic. My number 2 is Jace the Mind Sculptor. Mm-hmm. So Jace the Mind Sculptor is 2 colorless and 2 blue. It's a legendary planeswalker from World Wake, and it has starts off with 3 loyalty and 4 abilities. You can +2 it to look at the top card of target player's library. You can put that card on the bottom of that player's library. You can draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order for 0 loyalty. You can -1 to bounce a creature to its owner's hand, or you can -12 to exile all cards from target player's library, and then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library.
Card's dumb. That card is not fair. That card is ridiculous. I mean, so much digital ink has been spilt over Mr. Mind Sculptor. Wizards made a $20 silver coin once. I will never forget that because it is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen Wizards do in my entire life. And it was ridiculous then. It's even more ridiculous now. There is a beauty. It's just like a refined, like delicious taste that you get when you +2 someone and you say, you can keep it. And that's it. And that game more than likely ended right there. You may or may not have known it, but that's it.
It's also terrifying for the person being fate sealed because that signals that they're in such a good place that they can afford to do that. Where they're like, my hand's great. I don't even need to dig for anything. You feel better when they're digging because, you got a Jace, but your hand sucks. But if they're able to do that, they're stacked. Like that to me sends a message of I'm screwed.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, 10-esque years ago, this card was basically busted. And this card was better than anything else that had been made before it. It was a one-stop shop to win all the things. Feel free to look up my San Diego Pro Tour video where you can hear a whole bunch of pros tell me that it's terrible. And it was banned like 6 months later or whatever, which is fine and hilarious. But, at the end of the day, Jace is Jace. It's better than all. You don't have rap songs written about you because you suck.
Better than all. Exactly right.
It's true.
And for here's some stats for you from this most recent Pro Tour. 63 Jace the Mind Sculptors were registered at this most recent Pro Tour 25th anniversary. 48 Vengevines, 8 total Tarmogoyfs, 4 Bloodbraid Elves.
Wow, what a world.
That's it. So who do you think won that one? It sounds like Jace the Mind Sculptor might have had a comeback.
There we go. How the mighty have both fallen and gotten back up.
Yeah,
that's right.
There you go. All right. So, Ruben, what's your number 2?
So I kind of went a little bit off the reservation with my number 2, because I need to give a shout out to a card that has had no competitive pedigree. All right, it has had none. But there is nothing that has the kitchen table prowess, the casual clout of the original Leviathan. All right, that's my number 2.
What?
No joke, 100%. Because this was the first card I remember casting in my control decks when I was a little tiny baby. And I know that I'm going to get hate for this in the comments, and I don't care. And Evan's going to be like, "Oh, why are you doing
Why are you doing this? What's wrong with you, bro?"
It's not all about tournaments, man. It's not all about the top finishes.
Wow.
It's not all about the Grand Prix. Sometimes it's about slamming down a 9-mana 10/10 creature type Leviathan, originally from the dark, with Trample. Leviathan enters the battlefield tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice 2 islands. If you do, untap Leviathan. Leviathan can't attack unless you sacrifice 2 islands. This cost is paid as attackers are declared. This is so iconic. Now, I see your face, all right?
Look,
I see your scorn.
You can be wrong. It's fine. It's ridiculous.
I don't think I'm wrong.
I'm not mad. This is just so unlike you.
I know.
I'm not mad. I'm disappointed.
Number 2 is because I knew that we were going to have some arguments, but I knew that no one was going to have anything like this high.
Congratulations.
You want to talk about cards that appeal to Timmies? You want to talk about cards that appeal to the big stuff? Like, you want the biggest of the big, this is the card. There's no, like, you show this to a beginning Magic player and they go, man, that is spectacular. The original Mark, how do you pronounce the last name? Sorry.
Tiden.
Tadine.
Oh, Tadine. Yeah, it's Tadine.
Tiden?
No, Tadine.
The Mark Tiden art.
No.
Tadine, swallowing the lighthouse. It is so ubiquitous. It was in the original Beatdown expansion, which was one of the original sort of collector's editions of, like, these are the cards that we point out and say, these are the iconic. This is what people want to collect. It was even time shifted because of how iconic it was back in the day. And it's given birth to all of these other giant blue finishers. Stormtide Leviathan. Everything that costs, Sphinx of the Final Word, Aetherling, all of these big giant blue finishers from Polar Kraken all the way up to today with things like Chromium and Nezahal can owe it to Leviathan for being the first.
No.
Yes.
No. You can take your wrongness and you can enjoy it, and it's fine.
No, I'm not. I just am not wrong.
This does not make any sense because
listen, you and your ivory tower with your privilege
for
and
God's
your good
sake.
card, all right?
Let me go back to the
crappy card can be in a top 10, Evan.
Top 10 finishers of all time. Let's go back to 1995, y'all, where they really got it right, where they really showed us what's what with their 4 blue, 5 generic mana. It's bad.
All right, well,
it's fine. It's okay.
I think it's great, Ruben. I feel like I'm watching, like, Touched by an Angel, and, like, you'd had a near-death experience, or like a Christmas Story. Like, you almost died, and then you came back, and you're a whole new man. I think this is great.
Mm-hmm.
Would you rather have me just had another higher on my list, Evan? Would you rather have had another draw where we all talk about Jace the Mind Sculptor and we all talk about all the same cards? No, obviously we want to talk about Leviathan.
I'm also really happy that you didn't, like, I would rather you do this than spin an argument about how Mono Red Prison is really a control deck and your number 2 is like Stormbreath Dragon or something.
Right,
like, this
exactly,
is much better. This is much...
Chandra.
Yeah. It's fine.
Goblin Rabble Master, y'all.
Also, I don't know if I know this, but Jace the Mind Sculptor was my number 3 because I have a real list. Okay, so
you got a badass over here.
I also find it interesting that I noticed, Evan, you're wearing blue today and Ruben's wearing red, which is just a little, and I'm wearing green, but still just,
Fine. Look,
I have no red cards in my top 10.
Which, yeah.
Well, you need to get on brand, bro. Because Leviathan ain't. All right. Look, my number 2 is an actual number 2 to the second best control finisher of all time.
Listen, I'm not going to have this conversation.
Oh, we're not going to have, Mr. I use Pro Tour results, and I have ways and means of making my list. See,
Yeah.
Leviathan is like
off reservation. Comment section, you tell us what you think. If I'm wrong, fine. But you know what? I'm not going to listen to Mr. High and Mighty over here. All right?
Mr. High, Mr. Mighty, whatever. But let me tell you, bruh, there's only one. Look, here's the cool part. This control finisher is so famous. I only have to say one word. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Not only am I saying to say one word, you know like the history of this card. A huge history of this card. When I say the word Superman, what card is Superman? What card is Superman in Magic? There's only one of them, and it's Morphling from your set. A rare in Urza's Saga, for God's sake. Morphling is a finisher's finisher, y'all. Morphling is so powerful. They are still, to this day, to this year, in 2018, they are still finishing the cycle of the Lings, of the Brightlings, and the Thornlings. And now, the Brightling is the most recent one, right? The white one?
$30 and a Seeing Play and Legacy, Death, and Taxes. Like, no.
Let's talk about why. Morphling is a 2 blue, 3 generic mana, 3/3. It is a rare from Urza's Saga. It is a shapeshifter. It has 5 incredible abilities. Blue, untap it. Blue, it gains fly until end of turn. Blue, it gains shroud until end of turn, which means it can't be the target of spells or abilities. 1 generic mana gives it +1, -1 until end of turn, or 1 generic mana gives it -1, +1 until end of turn. So we talked about Aetherling, which is kind of the big brother. This is the OG. This is the unkillable, stupid, crazy card that was just, you played it when you had some open mana and you killed them. And this was the first time that had ever been seen back in Urza's Saga, where it was like, whoa, this creature actually does everything by itself. Pimmons Aura is an anagram of Superman's, or Superman?
Anagram of I am Superman.
There you go, which give essentially Morphling abilities to whatever creature you enchanted. So that in and of itself, again, is a legacy that lives on through Magic. Lings, Lings, eventually they're going to start making multicolor Lings after they get rid of all the original 5-color. And because I think black is the only one we don't have yet. Is that right?
I don't know, but I'm looking forward to that one.
We don't have.
Right, because we got the green one, got the red one, got the blue one, and now we have the white one, and we're waiting on the black one. So once we have those Lings, it's time to start reaching into which one the guilds have and all their crazy Lings and stuff, because this is an iconic creature type, an iconic artwork by RK Post, some of the most powerful and famous artwork that Magic has. This is a cornerstone of control finishers. When I say control finisher, and I tell you Morphling, you go, yeah. And the other guy goes Leviathan, and you're like, shut up.
Also, there's
I'm kidding.
There's also a spin-off in Unhinged of Greater Morphling, which is even more obnoxious, where for 2 colorless, Greater Morphling gains your choice of Banding, Bushido, Double Strike, Fear, Flying, First Strike, Haste, Landwalk Protection, Provoke, Rampage, Shadow, or Trample. Great. And like you said, Evan, it says something when, we talked about how, Millstone became a verb, that it was so powerful that it's used to describe something that we do. And Morphling was really the first, where we have Aetherling, we have like Magus of the Ring or Mage of the Ring that was in like Origins that people thought would see play, and from that, and then from that evolution, we've seen sort of the Nezahals, and it started off being these mana sinks, and they've now evolved into the can't be countered kind of monstrosities we have. But like you said, this is really the one that started it all, and it says something when you are a card that can be the first in an evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Inspiring Torchling from Planar Chaos, I believe. Thornling was in Conflux. Brightling obviously just came out. And Aetherling from Dragon's Maze. I'm really excited for that black one. I was toying with the different types of the names on Twitter a couple of months ago for things like
I remember that,
Diseaseling and Hateling. And stuff like that. So I'm really excited for the black one. And obviously to go along with our Wedge ultimatums, I think that there's plenty of clout amongst the card Morphling. Just a great card. With a ton of history, beautiful art that inspired much of the future clones, in addition to the future Ling creatures as well.
All right, let's move on here to number 1, and I'm just going to go on a limb, and I think Ruben and I share our number 1.
Well, I share number 1 with somebody, so.
Aaron, do you share number 1 with somebody?
Nope.
Well, how about, Aaron, you tell us what your number 1 is, and we'll close out the show with Ruben and mine.
My number one is a card that I have called to be banned at various points in my Magic career just because I find it infuriating. It's also a card that I kind of talked a little bit earlier with Sphinx's Revelation, how, it has scarred Wizards to where when you see cards that are reminiscent of it, you see them either being very expensive or being nowhere close to what the original was because the original was so broken. It's been reprinted exactly once where it's still sitting at $80. If you are playing a blue deck, you do not leave home without this card. It is the reason for the phrase bolt, snap, bolt, because oftentimes you'll be facing a control deck. You'll be feeling really, really good about yourself. You're at like a nice healthy 6. This is fine. And all of a sudden it's bolt, snap, bolt, and you're dead. You just win out of nowhere. Oftentimes this is the only creature that a control deck will run because it's the only creature it needs to run. And number one is Snapcaster Mage. So Snapcaster Mage is 1 in a blue. It's from original Innistrad creature type human wizard, 2/1 with flash. When Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. You want 2 time walks? Yeah, you can have one. 2 ancestral recalls? You can have one thanks to Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster Cryptic Command is held as cryptic.
Yeah, that's how good it is.
It's so annoying I can't even say it. But this changes the way the control decks are played. You're technically running 8 lightning bolts at that point because you can just get them back again, and it gets in for 2. You can just flash it in sometimes if you need to. You're in a bad spot when the control deck isn't even getting any value out of it. Where they're like, I need an ambush viper. This is what I need right now, and it's enough to kill you. You look at what we have since then. We get Archaeomancer, you get Torrential Gear Hulk, which costs 6, and so Wizards
came close
clearly,
to my top 10 though.
Yeah, but Wizards clearly understands how powerful this card was, and we will never have it this good again. But it fundamentally changes the way that blue decks are played. And if you are playing blue, you don't leave home without them. And they are enough because they do everything you want to be doing.
Now, this was the final invitational card. This was from 2007, where Tiago Chan won it, and which I was also involved in that one, which was fun. And he had originally pitched the Channel Land. Channel was Channel was a mechanic where you could pay a mana cost and discard the card to get an effect. Well, he wanted a land, like an island, the
land that he pitched was
2 blue.
It was like comes into play tapped, tap out of blue, or had the ability channel.
Right.
2
blue, 2 generic, counter target spell. Was it 3?
3 generic. 2 blue, 3 generic, counter target spell. Yeah.
Yeah.
He may have pitched it at 4, but then it was like, all right, maybe 5, they'll let me do it. But yeah, way too good. Uncounterable land counterspell was but then they let him have Snapcaster Mage, which again is topping the list. So
well, and this was one of the cards that, again, as I heard it from R&D, Flash was added at the last minute. Because that's what this card needed, was another bump to make it awesome.
I heard that this was red for a while as well. That this was a red card. Yeah. And I would have just copied sorceries. So yeah.
And for those who like to weep, it was originally put on pre-order, I think, for $7. Was the first ever pre-order price for this card. Didn't stay that way for long, and has never, I don't think, ever gotten anywhere close to that again. This was previewed at the first Modern Pro Tour ever, when Modern became a format and everyone broke it in half. This was the card they showed off as part of the upcoming set of Innistrad. So just to give you an idea of the history of Snapcaster Mage is very lauded, very well known, and this card will just continue to impact forever. Like, it's as cheap as basically as it can be, and it is powerful as all get out. The card's ridiculous.
It kind of has the same. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I was just going to say, it kind of has the same issue that Birthing Pod has, in that as long as they keep printing instants and sorceries, this card will continue to be good. Kind of like Birthing Pod. The more creatures we print, the better Birthing Pod gets. And so, they're always going to keep playing around with that design space. Blue is always going to have good cards. Maybe not as good as they were, but, this card is, there's always going to be something to do with a Snapcaster Mage.
Yeah, well,
the fact that this I'm not sure this one's a finisher.
I've lost to plenty of Snapcaster Mages before, where that's the plan.
I've lost to a Deathrite Shaman or two, but just because it ends the game, Lightning Bolt isn't.
We're gonna fight over this.
No,
we go fight. Okay.
Hey, it's no Leviathan. Okay, all right. So
I think Leviathan qualifies more as a finisher. I think Leviathan qualifies more as a finisher than an ambush viper, but
Let's
that's just me.
top 8 though. Let's see how many tournaments you've. Okay, let's go ahead here.
Things that have won tournaments does not a finisher make.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Look, I understand where Aaron's coming from in that if you look if you look up Magic control decks, I was surprised myself to see that like there's a ton of control decks, quote unquote, and all they have is 4 Snapcaster mages. Yeah. And just like a bunch of random stuff and bolts and counters and stuff.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Yeah. I was looking at control finishers and like, do I count like True Name Nemesis, right? Like what does Sword of Feast and Famine qualify as a control finisher? That was sort of the internal struggle I was having as well. So,
well, let me tell you.
I can commiserate.
I don't know how long. Well, look, I don't know how long it took you to come to the conclusion of what our number 1 is. But
not very long.
Literally, the first thing I did when I made this list was I put this at number 1 and I figured out what everything else was going to be. Because
it wasn't as quick for me. It was like, oh, what's a control finisher? Let's look through old control decks. Oh, it's obviously this. This has to be number 1.
Yeah, because this was the card that it's just they're not going to give you this anymore. This lived in a world with like damage on the stack and stuff. Like there's a whole host of reasons why this card is as stupid and as powerful as it was. When Shadow Mage Infiltrator, another invitational card, was supposed to be the King Daddy Mac. And they're like, well, we don't have any because those things are really expensive right now. So let's use this uncommon thing called Psychatog that was also an Odyssey and turned out to be a heck of a lot better than John Finkel on a card. And actually turned out to be my number 1 choice, not close, for what I can consider a control finisher to be. Ruben, what does it do?
Psychatog originally was an uncommon from the Odyssey expansion and part of a cycle, as oftentimes, one will jump ahead of the others in those cycles, such as Ultimatum or, Spectral Procession. Psychatog, very similar. Colorless blue-black gets you a 1/2 Aetherling creature. It has 2 abilities. Discard a card, Psychatog gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Exile 2 cards from your graveyard. Psychatog gets +1/+1 until end of turn. The thing that Psychatog was able to do, more affectionately known as Dr. Teeth to the fans of his.
That art is creepy.
Thanks to that original art, yeah, absolutely. Which they then turned into a player rewards card in 2005. The thing about that card is that all the other ones in the cycle didn't really synergize quite as well as that one did. This one had 2 abilities that were 2 great tasted great together. The other ones were like sacrifice an artifact or an enchantment and get +1/+1. Kind of great, I guess. But this one was discard cards and then use those discard cards. Every card in your hand then became a power and a half.
Well, note that this Psychatog also lets you discard things for free, which means the entire madness mechanic was turned on by this card, which is, again, very powerful. And it's hard to sort of put yourself in the mindset of, am I going to block this Psychatog? Every single time you attack for 1, you have to go, okay, how many cards in your hand? How many cards in your graveyard? And if you discard all of them and exile your entire graveyard, am I dead? You literally do that every time. So they'll ping you down to like 15, then like 14. Then you're like, oh my God, if I don't, I'm dead. Or if they have any sort of pump spell / exile everything. But it didn't matter. You didn't need that stuff. You had Circular Logic and Friends to get rid of whatever you were afraid of. You had plenty of, I know, right? You had plenty of madness things you could be doing. But at the end of the day, Psychatog is a very, very scary card that just... It ran the control decks that it was featured in, unlike any other card I can think of. Only second, Morphling was the only one that I feel could be right behind Psychatog in terms of this was the creature you played to kill your opponent every time. Yeah,
I think Morphling, Jace, those are like near the top of the list. But yeah, Psychatog is clearly far and away. You have other iconic characters that maybe could have been, in my Leviathan slot, things like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, things like Wormcoil Engine, the various Emrakuls, even an Elishnorn I considered as a finisher, but nothing is a finisher quite like Psychatog.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. And that was our top 10 control finishers. You will see them on screen now for your review. Please take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about. And we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to move here to our final slide. All right, so I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-host, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler, you guys for watching or listening. I hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Please follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe, do everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at Magic Mics, on Twitter at Magic Mics Cast, our Magic Mics subreddit, and like the Magic Mics page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at magicmicspodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at Magic Mics Podcast at libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week. Same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mics. Good night, everybody.